Marcus Reed stood in full marine dress blues, medals catching the sunlight, only to be shoved back from the arena doors by two smirking guards. Families streamed past, cameras flashing, but he was told to wait for clearance. The crowd's whispers turned into a wall of judgment, until four shadows stepped in behind him. Boots hit the pavement, in unison. Then a voice said, "Is there a problem here?" Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Share in the comments below. The air outside the Westfield Civic Arena shimmered with the heat of late May, the kind of day when the sky looked scrubbed clean and unforgivingly blue. Rows of cars jammed the parking lot, and families spilled out of them in bursts of color and noise, laughter, camera flashes, the squeals of children running ahead toward the glass-fronted building. Marcus Reed stood at the curb, his black polished shoes planted firmly on the concrete, the weight of his dress blues settling on his shoulders like an honor and a burden. All at once, sunlight glinted off the silver bars on his collar, and the trio of medals pinned high on his chest. He had worn this uniform through funerals, through ceremonies, through the most grueling days of service. Today it was supposed to be a celebration, his younger sister's college graduation. He had arrived early, the way the Marines trained him to. Punctuality was respect. But respect was not what he found at the front doors. Two security guards, one tall and pale with a rigid jawline, the other stocky and middle-aged with thinning hair, stepped forward before he could even reach for the handle. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your clearance badge," the taller one said. Marcus offered a polite nod, sliding a hand toward the inside pocket of his jacket. "I have my ticket and my military ID right here." The guard's eyes didn't drop to the offered items. Instead, his gaze held steady, cool, appraising Marcus in a way that was more inspection than conversation.
"That's not enough," the stockier guard added. "This entrance is for faculty and authorized guests only."
"I am an authorized guest," Marcus replied, voice level. "My sister's graduating. I have a front row seat reserved by the dean's office." The taller guard's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "Then you'll need to go to the side entrance. That's policy." Marcus turned his head slightly, scanning the flow of people streaming past. White men in polos, mothers in sundresses, elderly grandparents with walkers. None of them were being stopped. None were showing badges. None were being redirected. "This is the public entrance," Marcus said, still keeping his voice calm, though he could feel the first tightening in his chest. "And I'm already cleared." The taller guard leaned a fraction closer. "Sir, I'm telling you, side entrance. Now." It wasn't the words that cut deepest. It was the way they were delivered. Like an order to a trespasser. Like Marcus's presence here was somehow suspicious, somehow threatening. Behind him, the laughter of a family floated past. A father hoisted his daughter on his shoulders, their path completely unobstructed. The girl pointed at Marcus's medals and whispered something in her father's ear. The man glanced back, a quick flick of his eyes, then looked away without a word. Marcus's fingers flexed at his sides. In the core they drilled it into him. Never react to provocation. Keep your bearing. Maintain discipline. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was his sister's day. And still, here he was, forced to justify his right to walk through the same door as everyone else. A faint click pulled his attention. Off to the side, a young woman in a yellow dress was holding up her phone, recording. She didn't look away when Marcus's eyes met hers. If anything, she lifted her chin slightly. An unspoken "I see what's happening." The taller guard shifted uneasily, glancing at the phone before returning his gaze to Marcus. "Sir, I'm not going to argue with you. You already are," Marcus said quietly. The second guard gave a small, humorless laugh. "Look, we're just doing our jobs. No need to make this into something it's not." But Marcus knew better. He had felt this exact pressure before. Not in uniform, not on base, but in grocery stores. In airports, in parking lots, a subtle tightening of space around him, a silent question lingering in the eyes of strangers. "Do you belong here?" He drew a breath, the scent of hot asphalt and distant popcorn from the concession stand filling his lungs. "Then do your job," Marcus said. "Check my ticket. Check my ID. Let me in." The taller guard didn't move. Neither did the stockier one. Seconds stretched. People kept flowing past, a river of motion that bent around the standoff without slowing. Marcus could feel the warmth of the sun on the back of his neck, the sharp edge of humiliation scraping against his patience. In his peripheral vision, another phone rose into the air, its red recording light blinking like a quiet witness. For a brief moment, Marcus considered simply walking away, circling around to the side entrance just to avoid turning this into a scene. But he thought of his sister, the proud smile she'd worn when she mailed him the invitation, the way she'd said it wouldn't be graduation without you there. Marcus. He thought of the front row seat waiting inside, and how that seat would be empty if he didn't stand his ground. He planted his feet a little firmer. I'm not moving. The taller guard exhaled sharply, as if this decision had been inevitable. Then you'll have to wait here until we can verify your credentials. How long will that take? As long as it takes, the guard replied, eyes cold. Somewhere behind him, a man's voice muttered, ridiculous, and another added, they're stopping him for no reason. But the crowd didn't intervene. Not yet. Marcus stared past the guards, through the glass doors into the arena's lobby. He could see the graduation banner hanging above the check-in desk. Bright blue letters declaring, congratulations class of 2025. It was close enough to touch, yet impossibly far. The medals on his chest caught another flash of sunlight, a reminder of battles fought and victories earned. Victories that in this moment seemed invisible to the men blocking his way. He swallowed down the anger, the kind that burns slow and deep, and kept his posture straight. Every inch of his bearing screamed dignity, even as inside, his pride was being stripped thread by thread. The taller guard shifted his stance, clearly expecting Marcus to eventually back down. The stocky one checked his watch. Neither man looked at the people streaming by. Their focus remained fixed on the man in front of them, the Marine who, for reasons they wouldn't say aloud, wasn't welcome to enter freely. The sound of footsteps approached from behind, heavy and deliberate, the kind of gait that made people instinctively step aside. And then came a voice, low, steady, and edged with steel. Is there a problem here? The words hung in the air. Is there a problem here? Slicing through the murmur of foot traffic and the distant hum of graduation fanfare inside the arena. Marcus didn't turn around immediately. He could feel the shift behind him, the way a presence can change the density of a space before you even see the face attached to it. The guards noticed it too. The taller one straightened, his eyes flicking over Marcus's shoulder toward whoever had spoken. The stockier guard's jaw tightened, like he was preparing for trouble. The crowd, which had been flowing smoothly moments before, began to slow, curiosity drawing people into a loose half-circle. Parents clutched their kids a little closer, some out of concern, others out of a desire to secure a good view of whatever was about to happen. The whispers started small, rippling through the group like a current. Who is he? Marine, I think. Look at his uniform. Probably caused some trouble. That's why they stopped him. No, that's not right. They're just hassling him. It was always like that, Marcus thought. Two narratives forming instantly, one rooted in assumption, the other in observation. Neither side ever paused to ask him what was real. He kept his posture still, back straight, eyes fixed forward. If the Corps had taught him anything, it was how to withstand pressure without flinching. In Paris Island, the drill instructors would get so close he could feel the heat of their breath, screaming insults and commands in the same tone. You learned not to react, not to give them the satisfaction of breaking your focus. But this wasn't boot camp. This was supposed to be a day of celebration, and yet here he was, held at the gate, like an uninvited guest at his own family's milestone. The voice behind him came again, a little louder this time. I asked you a question. Marcus finally turned his head. The man standing a few paces away was tall, lean, with weathered skin, and eyes that had seen more than their share of storms. He wore a simple button-down and jeans, but his stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at his sides, spoke of someone who'd spent years in situations where readiness meant survival. The guards exchanged a quick glance. They knew this man, or at least recognized the type. The taller one cleared his throat. Sir, this is a private matter. Please keep moving. The stranger didn't move. Instead, his gaze shifted to Marcus, scanning the medals, the crisp press of the uniform, the steady set of his jaw. Something passed between them. Silent acknowledgement, soldier to soldier. A few more people in the crowd lifted their phones, angling for a better shot. One young man in a baseball cap muttered, "Man, this is about to blow up." Marcus kept his tone measured. "No problem here. Just being told I can't walk in like everyone else." "That's not true," the taller guard interjected quickly. "We have procedures. We're following them. Procedures you're not following with anyone else." Marcus replied, the words precise, calm, but edged with steel. The stocky guard's hand twitched toward his radio. The taller one shifted his weight, a subtle signal that he was feeling cornered. Inside the arena, a burst of applause rang out, muffled through the glass doors. Marcus imagined his sister walking across the stage later, her smile searching for him in the crowd. A smile that might falter if his seat was empty. A woman near the front of the gathering whispered to her husband. If he was white, they'd have let him in already. Her husband gave a tight nod, but didn't say anything aloud. Another man, standing farther back, muttered, "Bet there's more to the story." And that was the poison of moments like this. The way strangers would fill in the blanks with whatever story fit their worldview. The way racism disguised itself in the language of policy, procedure, and security concerns. Marcus thought back to his training days. The endless pre-dawn runs, the drills in the sweltering Carolina heat, the instructors barking at them to push past pain. Back then, the uniform meant you were part of something greater than yourself. But here, now, in front of these doors, it seemed to make him a target. The stranger behind him shifted, stepping closer until he was almost shoulder to shoulder with Marcus. "You served?" he asked quietly. Though not so quietly the guards couldn't hear. "Still do," Marcus answered. The taller guard's eyes flickered. A small tell, but noticeable. From somewhere deeper in the crowd. Another voice cut in. "This is ridiculous. Let him in." The guards stiffened, and Marcus could feel the heat of their discomfort. The taller one's posture was textbook defensive. Squared shoulders, feet planted, chin lifted just enough to project authority without outright aggression. The stockier guard's hands were clasped in front of him now, but the tension in his fingers betrayed his unease. The stranger studied the guards for a beat, then looked at Marcus. "You want me to walk in with you?" Marcus shook his head. Not yet. He wasn't ready to escalate, but he also wasn't ready to back down. Somewhere in the distance a car horn blared, snapping a few people out of their trance, but most stayed rooted in place, watching. The whispers had grown into a low hum, a mixture of curiosity, indignation, and quiet judgment. One child, holding her mother's hand, tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, why can't the soldier go in?" The mother didn't answer. Marcus's eyes locked once more on the graduation banner through the glass. It was surreal. So close he could see the fine creases in the vinyl, yet separated from him by two men who'd decided he didn't belong. The stranger behind him adjusted his stance again. And then, from farther back in the walkway, came the sound. Heavy, deliberate footfalls. Boots. Not the casual shuffle of the crowd. Not sneakers or dress shoes. Boots striking pavement with perfect, even spacing. The murmurs hushed almost instinctively, as if everyone recognized that whatever was coming next would change the tone entirely. Marcus didn't turn yet, but the rhythm of those steps carried the weight of discipline, a cadence that only came from years in service. The guards' eyes shifted past Marcus, locking on the source of the sound. Their expressions changed, not fear exactly, but a sudden awareness that the balance of power at this doorway had just tilted. And then the silhouettes emerged from the thinning crowd, 4 figures moving in unison, shoulders broad, postures rigid, eyes locked forward. 4 imposing silhouettes, boots striking the pavement in perfect unison. The rhythm of the boots broke the air the way a metronome breaks silence. Measured, inevitable, impossible to ignore. Heads turned, the murmurs tapered into a taut hush. 4 men emerged from the moving mosaic of families and gowns, plain clothes. No insignia, yet there was no mistaking the way they carried themselves. Their spines were straight as flagpoles. Their eyes didn't dart, they assessed. Even their breathing seemed synced to an invisible cadence that said, "We've been places where hesitation costs." The tall stranger who had stepped beside Marcus shifted his weight, recognition flickering across his face. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. The crowd's curiosity hooked tighter, drawn by that wordless electricity that passes between people who have lived under the same unblinking sky. The first of the 4, sandy-haired with a quiet, weathered steadiness, swept the scene with one glance. Marine in dress blues at the door, 2 security guards with defensive posture, bystanders recording, glass doors reflecting the entire tableau like a held-up mirror. His jaw set, not in anger but in decision. Without breaking stride, the 4 men took position behind Marcus. Not touching him, not crowding him, simply forming a line at his back that made the space feel suddenly anchored. Their alignment wasn't for show, it was instinct. In that formation Marcus could have closed his eyes and still known exactly where each of them stood. The taller guard tried to keep his chin where authority likes it, elevated, but it wobbled for a fraction. The stockier guard's hand drifted toward his belt, then stopped short, fingers tapping the radio as if to reassure himself it existed. "Gentlemen," the tall guard said, voice pitched to sound official, "this entrance is restricted. We're following our protocol." "Protocol," the second guard echoed, as if repeating it could conjure legitimacy. "Special clearance only." No one from the four behind Marcus answered immediately. Their silence was not empty. It filled the space with the suggestion of higher standards and longer memories. Marcus felt it at his back like a brace sliding into place. He didn't turn around. He kept his eyes forward, jaw locked, breath measured, the same techniques that held him steady when instructors screamed 2 inches from his face at 3 in the morning. The sandy-haired man's gaze landed briefly on Marcus's medals. Not gawking, just a note taken, a box checked. Beside him a broad-shouldered man, with close-cropped black hair, and a calm that felt like coiled wire scanned the guards' hands, their feet, their radios, the distance to the door, the strength of the crowd's mood. Another, lean, with a faded scar across one eyebrow, swept the perimeter, exits, potential escalation points. The mother with a stroller who looked like she was deciding whether to turn around. The fourth, older than the others by a few hard years, took a half step back, giving himself a wider view, the kind of move a person makes when he's used to being responsible for outcomes. "Sir," the taller guard tried again, addressing Marcus as though addressing him could erase the men behind him. "Like we said, you'll need to use the side entrance. That's posted policy for today's event." The older of the four finally spoke. His voice was mild, almost courteous. "Is that policy posted where we can read it?" The guard blinked, thrown by the tone. He nodded toward a laminated sheet taped to a stanchion several feet away. "There." The lean man with the scar stepped out just enough to read the document from a distance, eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment, his attention caught on a line low on the page, initialed in blue. He said nothing, but his lips pressed together in a faint, knowing way before he returned to his place. Marcus kept still. He felt the old training crawl up his spine like a cool hand. Hold, hold, hold. You do not blink first. Behind the phones, opinions continued to braid themselves into narratives. "Seals," someone whispered, awe softening the edges of the word. "How can you tell?" "Trust me, you can tell." The tall stranger at Marcus's shoulder finally leaned a fraction closer, voice pitched for him alone. "You okay, Marine?" "I'm steady," Marcus said, though the words scraped on the way out. He swallowed, tasting metal and asphalt, and the bitter varnish of being treated like a problem on the happiest day his sister had had in years. The sandy-haired SEAL addressed the guards again, slower this time, every syllable placed where it could do the most work. "You said special clearance. What does that require?" "Pre-issued badge," the taller guard replied. "Faculty and VIPs only. Everyone else uses the side." "And you're checking badges for everyone?" the older SEAL asked, letting the question dangle where the cameras could catch it. A shadow of confusion crossed the stocky guard's face. He glanced at the families flowing freely through the door, then back at the SEAL's expressionless calm, and chose stubbornness. "We're spot checking." The lean SEAL's eyes cut sideways at that. "Spot checking," he repeated, flat. The two words dissolved any pretense that this was about paper and plastic. The crowd heard it too, a low rumble of disapproval rolling over their shoes. Marcus breathed through the memory that tried to muscle its way in. A young recruit beside him during a live-fire exercise, hands trembling, eyes begging Marcus to say something that would make it manageable. Marcus had said then what he said now to himself. Find the 3 things you can control: breath, posture, tone. He adjusted none of them. The sandy-haired SEAL lifted his gaze to the laminated sheet again, then slid a phone from his back pocket. His thumb moved once, twice, and he scanned something on the screen with a focus that made the taller guard shift. "You gentlemen get the update from this morning?" the sandy-haired one asked. "What update?" the stocky guard said, then immediately regretted the shape his mouth had chosen for the words. The lean SEAL looked at the older one. No words, just that look. Marcus didn't know what it meant. Not exactly. Only that men who work in teams sometimes pass whole paragraphs in a glance. The tall stranger finally stepped back half a pace, giving the 4 room. He glanced at Marcus, then at the crowd, and his mouth tightened with a complicated kind of pride, the pride you feel when you see someone refuse to be moved. "Look," the taller guard said, asserting a new line of defense. "We're not singling anyone out. We're minimizing risk. Risk, the older SEAL repeated, and managed to make it sound like a term he'd written reports about in places these men had only seen on cable news. What risk does a Marine in dress blues pose to a graduation ceremony? It's not about him, the stockier guard said too quickly. It's about the situation. The situation, the lean SEAL echoed, voice soft enough to chill. A child asked again, louder this time. Why can't the soldier go in? Her mother put a hand on her shoulder, eyes flitting toward the guards as if the answer might be printed on their shirts. Marcus's throat tightened, not with tears but with that other thing, the dull ache that comes when dignity is asked to wait in line behind convenience. He thought of his sister's text from Dawn. Front row, left side, I'll find you. He wondered how long before she checked her phone and saw nothing from him, before worry bled into her once-in-a-lifetime day. The sandy-haired SEAL angled his phone so only the older one could see. A small nod passed between them. The older SEAL's voice, when it came, had a thread of finality stitched through it. You have a printout there, he said, eyes on the laminated sheet. But the county's updated directive for today's event, timestamped 0803, indicates expedited entry for uniformed service members and registered family. That includes direct access through this entrance. And contrary to what you've been telling folks, the memo removes the badge requirement for those categories. A few people in the crowd exhaled out loud, the way witnesses do when the truth shows up in writing. The tall guard flushed, but rallied behind the only shield he had left. We, haven't seen that. Now you have, the sandy-haired SEAL replied evenly. Eyes steady, phone still angled down. He didn't shove it into the guard's face. He didn't have to. The authority lived in the posture, not the pixel. The stockier guard swallowed. Even if that's true, we still reserve the right to apply your judgment. The older SEAL finished for him, without warmth. Judgment is what's under review here. Marcus let that sentence sit inside him, like a weight on a scale. It landed correctly, balancing something that had been listing since he walked up. A man in a blazer, passing by, paused and whispered toward his companion. Isn't one of those guys the keynote? I saw a photo on the program. The companion shrugged, uncertain, then looked at the older SEAL with new eyes. The rumor moved through the crowd like dye in water. Keynote, VIP, on the program. The guards heard it too. Both went very still. The lean SEAL's attention snagged on a reflection in the glass, the glitter of a lanyard worn by the tall stranger at Marcus's side. For the first time, the lean SEAL actually looked at him, and somehow saw both more and less. More of the experience in the man's gaze, less of the civilian camouflage. You with the school? He asked, gently. The stranger's mouth quirked. Not today. The stocky guard, rattled by how fast the ground was shifting, grabbed at the laminated sheet like a raft. We still have the right to refuse entry if we deem a person disruptive. The sandy-haired SEAL's eyes cooled a degree. Who's been disruptive? He let the question drift toward the phones, toward the mother's worried face, toward the Marine who hadn't moved except to breathe. It hung there, obvious, condemning without saying the word. Marcus felt the hum behind his ribs steady out into a line. He didn't want anyone to crush these guards. He didn't want spectacle. He wanted fairness that didn't need witnesses to behave. Gentlemen, the older SEAL said at last, each syllable clipped with painstaking patience, you can fix this in 10 seconds, or you can make your day very long. The taller guard stared at the glass doors, at the banner, at the ring of eyes. He looked like a man who suddenly realized the story he thought he was in had never really been his. Inside, through the doors, a fresh wave of applause rolled. The class of 2025 was filing into rows. The orchestra had begun to tune. Time was bleeding away. The lean SEAL's phone buzzed. He glanced, then showed it briefly to the older one. A text, a name, a tiny thumbnail image of a schedule grid. Whatever it was, it nudged their posture from patience toward resolve. The tall guard's mouth opened, searching for a compromise that wouldn't put his pride on the sidewalk. Maybe if he... Marcus finally spoke, voice low, even. My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed. I have a registered ticket in the name of Dean Evelyn Hart. I'm here for my sister's graduation. I've complied with every request you've made. I'm gonna enter through this door. Silence took a breath. The crowd leaned in as one. The older SEAL shifted his feet, a half-degree forward that changed the entire geometry of the doorway. His eyes were level. His tone was almost gentle. You might want to think this through. For a long, controlled second, no one moved. Then the taller guard blinked, as if pulling himself back into his own body. He reached for the stanchion and stripped the laminated sheet from its clip with fingers that trembled, just enough for the plastic to rattle. The noise sounded small and sharp, like a warning bell. Here, he said, thrusting the page toward the space between them, as if paper could be a wall. Policy. Special clearance. We're not making this up. The stockier guard angled closer, chin jutting in a show of steadiness that his eyes betrayed. We don't want any trouble, he added, which in moments like this, always meant we want you to back down without us admitting anything. Marcus didn't touch the page. He didn't lean in or argue each line. He knew the trap of arguing line by line. Instead, he let his gaze slide over the boldface headings, the bullet points like small commands, AO-sitterized entrances, VIP badges, risk mitigation. He clocked the date stamped at the top, yesterday, and the signature at the bottom, inked with an authoritative loop, K. Morrow, supervisor. Behind him, the 4 men in civilian clothes held their formation, the air around them taut with unspoken comprehension. The sandy-haired one kept his phone low. The older one watched the guards. The lean one skimmed the fine print with eyes that had scanned much worse at 3 a.m. in harsher places. The 4th man, the broad-shouldered one with the quiet energy, took in the crowd and the cameras, a human barometer reading the pressure rise. A young woman in a yellow dress shifted her stance at the front of the gathering, bringing her phone higher. Her lens caught the reflection of the laminated page in the glass, the bureaucratic sheen of policy weaponized, rules selected, and sharpened into points. The taller guard found his confidence in the ink. Point 3, he read, tapping the plastic with a fingernail. Main entrance is restricted to faculty, VIPs with badges, and security-cleared staff. Point 5, all other attendees are directed to auxiliary entry B or C. He glanced up, meeting Marcus's eyes for the first time since he'd said side entrance. Those are the rules. Marcus felt the old cadence of instruction rise in him, like muscle memory, that quiet voice from a dirt field years ago, when he'd stood with a sand-weighted pack digging into his shoulders, and a drill instructor barked through the heat. A Marine doesn't quit. Not in combat, not in life. He had taken that line and fed it to himself on nights that stretched too long, on mornings when dawn felt indifferent. He took it now, rolled it over the grain of this moment, and let it harden his spine. Rules, the lean SEAL murmured, almost to himself, are only as clean as the people applying them. The stockier guard flinched. Maybe at the truth of it, maybe at the tone. We're applying them to everyone, he said. The words came out too fast to be true. As if summoned by the lie, a father in a polo slipped through the very door the guards were blocking, with a little boy who clutched a miniature stuffed eagle. No one stopped them. The taller guard didn't look. The cameras did. A hush lifted a fraction. Not silence, not sound. Something in between, like a crowd leaning forward together. The sandy-haired SEAL angled his phone slightly and spoke in a voice that sounded like he'd briefed men under rotor wash. County memo, he said, neutral, almost bored. Time-stamped Euro 3, expedited entry for uniformed service members and registered family, main entrance approved, supersedes yesterday's venue sheet. He wasn't taunting, he was laying down coordinates. The taller guard didn't look at the phone. He tapped the laminate again, as if to drown the newer words out with the sound. This is what we were given. By who? The older SEAL asked, gentle enough to be dangerous. The taller guard hesitated, a hairline pause barely visible, then jabbed at the signature, Supervisor Morrow. A murmur rippled because names have gravity. Someone in the back whispered, Morrow runs all event security. The rumor from a minute ago, one of those guys is the keynote. Braided with this one. And suddenly the crowd wasn't just watching a standoff. They were watching a hierarchy argue with itself. Marcus felt his jaw clench, then made himself release it. He thought of his sister riding front row, left side. I'll find you, thought of the chair with his name on it. Imagined the program folded neatly in her hand. He kept his voice calm. I have a ticket in the dean's block. I checked in on the app this morning. If you scan my code, you'll see my seat. Phones and apps don't override posted policy. The stockier guard replied, and there it was, the sentence that turned common sense into a cul-de-sac. He was breathing a little harder now, as if simply holding ground required more oxygen than he'd factored. The older SEAL's eyes dropped to the lower edge of the laminate, where the plastic had been sealed slightly crooked. He lifted his chin. The taller guard pressed the sheet tighter to his own chest. You can read it from there. The lean SEAL's mouth tugged at one corner. Not a smile. Selective enforcement has a tell, he said under his breath. It always leaves fingerprints. Missed updates. Uneven application. Different tone of voice depending on who's standing where. A man in a blazer stepped forward with tentative authority. Excuse me, he said, lifting his lanyard just enough to show a thin square of laminated ID. I'm with the College of Arts. Sir, step back, the stockier guard snapped, too loud, too quick. The man startled, retreating, and in the small tremor of his movement, another truth emerged. Even people on the inside could be pushed aside when a script needed them to be extras. An elderly woman at the fringe of the group, her hair soft white, her posture straight as a fence post, cleared her throat. Young man, she said to the taller guard, voice clean as a bell. I've organized volunteers for this arena for 22 years. Not once have we required a badge from a uniformed Marine to use the front door. Ma'am, times change, the taller guard said, and the politeness couldn't blunt the blade. They do, she returned, and sometimes not for the better. Marcus looked at her and felt his pulse ease a degree. Allies arrive the way shade does. At the moment you need to stop burning. The sandy-haired SEAL, still studying his phone, added, your laminate references Addendum B. That addendum is rescinded. New directives explicit. Whoever briefed you didn't finish their homework. The taller guard's ears blotched red. We can't just take your word for it. The lean SEAL lifted his eyes, and for the first time there was heat there. You're not. You're taking the county administrator's word for it. Or you can keep taking yesterday's, the one that lets you say policy while you decide who gets to be an exception. An unexpected tremor cut through the stocky guard's hand. He adjusted his grip on the laminate, and with an awkward shuffle, revealed something that hadn't been visible before. A second sheet, clear plastic over cheap printer paper, stapled behind the first and half crooked. The lean SEAL's gaze snagged on it. The older one saw the catch and looked too. What's the second page? The older SEAL asked, tone still even. The taller guard hesitated again, then tried to slide the page back under his arm. Internal notes. Let me guess, the sandy-haired SEAL said mildly. Use discretion. The stocky guard's mouth twitched open and shut. The taller one stiffened. The yellow dress woman's camera grabbed the corner of the second page in the reflection. A smudge of handwriting in blue. The curve of initials that matched the signature at the bottom of the first sheet. Marcus didn't need to read the words to hear them. He'd heard them all his life, wrapped in different paper. We reserve the right. We were told to keep an eye. It's not about you. The old instruction from boot camp hovered again, but now it braided with his father's quiet prayer voice from Sunday mornings. Hold your ground without hatred. Strength isn't loud. Inside, the orchestra swelled through the glass. A presenter's voice boomed, indistinct, the room beyond this door moving forward without him. A new voice cut through the outer edge of the crowd. A woman, purposeful, out of breath but authoritative. Excuse me. She wore a navy blazer, her lanyard bouncing as she weaved through. When she reached the doors and saw Marcus, she stopped, eyes widening with recognition tinged with embarrassment. Staff Sergeant Reed. Marcus turned his head. Yes, I'm Taryn Cho, she said. Assistant to Dean Hart. I've been looking for you. We didn't see you check in at the VIP table. I tried, he said calmly. I was redirected. Taryn's jaw worked around a response she checked at the last second. She pivoted to the taller guard. He's on the dean's list. Main entrance. Front row seating. He's also listed in the program introduction. The taller guard clung to the laminate, like a life jacket. Ma'am, with respect policy indicates. The updated policy indicates he goes through this door, Taryn said, steel under the politeness. I was in the briefing at 8. We were told to honor service members and their immediate family. The older SEAL watched this exchange like a chess player studying a late middle game. The sandy-haired one studied the taller guard. The lean one studied Taryn's face, and whatever he saw there made him relax by a degree you would only notice if you'd learned to measure men in quarter inches. The stockier guard's eyes went shiny at the corners. Not tears, exactly, but the sheen of someone feeling a trap spring shut around him. We didn't get that update, he muttered. You did, Taryn said, softer now. The email went to your whole team. She tapped the top of the laminate where a faint line of clear tape held a crease. And this, her voice dropped further. This is last night's draft. I know because I wrote it before the county directive came through. A stir went through the crowd, disbelief and a kind of grim satisfaction, mixing like weather. The taller guard's fingers tightened on the plastic, until it bowed. Then came the twist. Small in motion, enormous in consequence. The lean SEAL's eyes flicked to the signature again. He exhaled, then shifted 2 inches to the left. Enough that his shoulder no longer blocked the glass's reflection of the second page. The phone lenses caught it clean. A handwritten note at the top of the stapled sheet. The words slanted and hurried, the ink just a touch darker than the signature below. Main door. Use discretion. Hold uniforms without badges until cleared. KM. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a smolder. Discretion as a license. The kind of instruction that becomes invisible in the retelling, because it wears the camouflage of reasonableness. A few people in the crowd cursed under their breath. Someone said, "There it is." The taller guard saw the shift in faces, and realized the reflection had betrayed him. His voice pitched up. "You can't film internal notes. You're standing in front of a public entrance," Taryn said, tired now. "Everything about this is public." Marcus felt an ache under his sternum, an old familiar hurt. He'd learned to live with these little cuts, paper thin but relentless, where a rule was lifted like a shield, and tilted just so that it blocked him and no one else. He wanted to look at the stocky guard and say, "You could fix this." Wanted to look at the taller one and ask, "Do you hear yourself?" He did neither. He respected his own threshold too much to spend it on arguments with men who weren't listening for answers. The older SEAL finally shifted his weight. A quiet, inevitable movement, like the second hand passing 12. "We're finished discussing yesterday's paper," he said. "You've been given today's directive by 2 separate sources. You have the dean's office confirming you have a Marine in uniform with a registered ticket. The longer you hold this, the worse it gets for everyone." The taller guard swallowed, and the knot moved down his throat like a decision he couldn't digest. Pride stood beside him, hand on his shoulder, heavy as armor and twice as blinding. The stockier guard broke first. His voice dropped to a whisper that still carried, "Maybe we should." The taller guard cut him off with a stare, then turned away. The laminate bent like a blade in his grip. His hand went to his radio. He pressed the button, eyes on the middle distance, as if refusing to see the people in front of him might make them disappear. Static cracked. The crowd went even quieter, as if the frequency itself had drawn their breath. "Get the supervisor," he said into the mic, jaw tight. "We have a situation." He arrived fast and flushed, cutting through the crowd like an argument looking for a period. The laminated badge on his belt gleamed. K. Morrow, Event Security Supervisor. The guard straightened as if pulled by strings. The taller one thrust the bent policy sheet forward, grateful for a higher authority to hide behind. Morrow didn't look at Marcus first. He surveyed the 4 men in civilian clothes, and fixed on the older one with a stare that tried to pin him to the concrete. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice too loud for politeness, too practiced for surprise. The older SEAL didn't blink. "Public entrance," he said. "Public event." Morrow's eyes flicked to the phones raised like a forest of antennae, then back to the formation behind Marcus. "This isn't a staging ground," he said. "You're creating a disturbance." "We're correcting one," the sandy-haired SEAL replied, even, almost bored. Morrow's jaw clicked. He turned to the taller guard. "Report. Refused side entrance," the guard said, forcing righteousness through tight teeth. "Non-compliant. Drew a crowd." "Refused is not accurate," Taryn interjected carefully. "The updated directive." Morrow lifted a hand without looking at her, as if batting away a gnat. "I'll get to you." Marcus stood without an inch of shift. The heat pressed at the edges of his vision, but his focus stayed narrow. The banner beyond the glass, the shape of Rose inside, the image he held of his sister's face, scanning for him and finding absence. He would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing desperation crack his composure. Not today. Morrow finally let his gaze land on Marcus's medals. It lingered there a second too long, cataloging, weighing, daring the shine to mean something. "Name, Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed. You're here for my sister's graduation. Registered front row seat. Verified by the dean's office." Morrow nodded, as if he were humoring a salesman. "And yet you're at the faculty entrance." "It's the main entrance," the older SEAL said calmly, "and he qualifies under the county's 083 directive." The lean SEAL added, "You signed a sheet superseded by that directive." He didn't smile, and someone added use discretion. By hand. A thin wash of color moved up Morrow's neck. Internal notes are none of your concern. They are when they justify detaining a Marine while everyone else walks in, the sandy-haired SEAL said. Morrow's gaze sharpened. Detaining? He's free to use entry B or C. A murmur rolled through the crowd. The sound of people picking sides, inch by inch. On the left, a group of veterans in baseball caps muttered assent, the brim of one hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much to be patient with. Petty power. On the right, a man in a suit whispered to his wife, "Just take the side door," as if convenience were virtue. The tall stranger who'd first stood beside Marcus folded his arms and said, almost to himself, "Admission isn't a maze for some, and a carpet for others." Morrow shifted strategy. He turned toward the four men with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "You're Navy," he said, not asking. "So you know chain of command. You also know what happens when people confuse procedure with permission." "We know what happens when people hide prejudice inside procedure," the older SEAL replied. "The results look like this." Morrow took a step closer, close enough that his cologne, sharp and expensive, edged into the hot air. "And you know what happens when a crowd turns," he said, lower now, for the SEALs alone. "Things break, people get hurt. I'm trying to prevent that." The broad-shouldered SEAL finally spoke, voice soft as if speaking to a spooked horse. "Then open the door." A tremor passed through Morrow's mouth, gone as soon as it came. He pivoted, addressing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. Please proceed to entry B or C for expedited access. We'll have you inside shortly." No one moved. The phones didn't drop. The veterans didn't blink. Taryn lifted her chin. "Supervisor Morrow," she said, each syllable clipped with office training precision. "Our office confirmed Staff Sergeant Reed at this entrance. The directive is clear." Morrow's eyes cut back to her with something that sat uncomfortably between rebuke and warning. "Assistant Cho, you can manage seating. I'll manage security. You're managing optics," the lean SEAL said, quiet but audible. "Different job." Morrow turned to Marcus again, cruising for a crack. "If you care about your sister's day, don't make yourself the story." "I didn't," Marcus said. Steady. "You did." It landed. The crowd breathed as one. Morrow exhaled long through his nose, and the mask slipped for a heartbeat. He looked tired, not from the day, but from the years spent believing that the order of things depended on men like him keeping certain doors, subtly harder for certain people to pass. Then the mask slid back into place. He jabbed a finger at the bent laminate in the taller guard's hand. "My signature is on that policy. And your initials are on the note that contradicts the county's," Taryn said. It wasn't defiance. It was math. Morrow's smile hardened. "You are out of your lane." The sandy-haired SEAL's phone buzzed. He glanced down. "Supervisor," he said, eyes rising again. "You should check your email. The county administrator just forwarded you the reminder. Subject line clarification for venue leads." Morrow didn't look. "We don't govern by email chimes." "No," the older SEAL said. "You govern by character. Paper only amplifies it." The sentence hung there, plain and heavy. A few people clapped once or twice before thinking better of it. The sound truncated but unmistakable. Morrow's gaze slid past Marcus to the doors. On the other side of the glass, ushers were beginning to seat the final stragglers. Inside, the orchestra's tuning had ended. A drum roll fluttered the air like wings. "Here's what we're going to do," Morrow said, tone switching to the briskness of solution. "Staff Sergeant Reed will be escorted to entry B for verification. Once complete, he'll be escorted to his seat." "Escorted," the lean SEAL repeated, tasting the word and finding the rust on it. "It's standard," Morrow said. "It's punitive," Taryn replied, "and unnecessary." Marcus said nothing. His stillness had become its own center of gravity. He wasn't bargaining with them. He was waiting for them to discover their own reflection and either step aside or break it. Unexpectedly, the tall stranger, at Marcus's shoulder, slid a hand into his pocket and drew out a slim, battered wallet. He flipped it open, flashed something, and closed it again with a soft snap. Morrow's eyes flicked down in reflex. Whatever he saw tightened his posture a notch. "Volunteer chaplain," the stranger said mildly. "Been at this arena 15 years. I've walked grieving families through these doors. Not today." He gestured toward Marcus without flourish. "Don't make him process your mistake." Morrow's nostrils flared. The tall guard shifted on his feet, suddenly unsure of which face to mirror. The stocky guard stared at the concrete. Last chance, the older SEAL said, not threatening, simply naming the moment. Follow the directive. Morrow's face arranged itself into institutional patience. I will follow the directive I validated for my team. Yesterday's, the sandy-haired SEAL said. Today's, Morrow snapped back, and finally turned to glance at the phone the SEAL now held up for him. A thin layer of glass reflecting Morrow's own face over the county header. He didn't read it. He looked at his reflection instead. The veterans shifted forward a half step, not to swarm but to stand where a line might be drawn. The man in a suit tugged his wife's hand, whispering, "Let's just go around." But she didn't move. The elderly volunteer folded her arms and fixed Morrow with a gaze that could turn rain away from a picnic. Inside, a voice boomed the greeting, "Families and honored guests." The words warped through the glass. Time thinned. Morrow's hand hovered near his radio, uncertainty worming in. In his head the calculus ran, concede now or call for reinforcement that would make the optics worse. He chose the move men choose when they fear being seen losing. He lifted the radio to his mouth. A faint, far-off sound threaded the heat. A siren distant at first, then bending nearer, a steel thread pulling through cloth. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Cops." Morrow didn't smile, but something in his shoulders said relief. He pressed the transmit button, voice clipped and official again, the mask now resealed. "Dispatch, this is Supervisor Morrow, at Westfield Civic Arena main entrance. Status update pending arrival." The siren swelled, rounding a corner in the distance, growing louder, closer, inevitable. They heard the cruisers before they saw them, the sirens cutting through the afternoon like a blade, then throttling down into an urgent wail as the cars rounded the corner and glided toward the curb. Red and blue spooled across glass and faces, washing the crowd in alternating color. Alarm, calm, as if the day itself couldn't decide which story to tell. Two patrol cars settled nose to nose with the main doors, idling heat, light bars stuttering. Doors opened with practiced efficiency. A tall white officer in a short-sleeved uniform stepped out first. Blonde crew-cut forearms vascular and tense. The second officer was a black woman with a steady, assessing gaze, her hair in a tight bun, her badge catching the light as she closed her door gently, not slamming it like a punctuation mark. Their hands hovered near their belts, not gripping, not relaxed. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Not fear, but that bitter taste at the back of the tongue that comes from recognition. This scene had a script he had watched play out too many times. From sidewalks and headlines, and the corner of his own eye in reflective glass. You could be impeccable, and still be mistaken for a problem. You could be in dress blues, and still be seen as a disruption. The uniform didn't cancel certain suspicions. It only confused them. Around him phones lifted higher, a slow, synchronized rise of rectangles catching the light, each one a new witness. The murmuring thinned to careful silence, the seals adjusted by inches, subtle as a tide. Shoulders aligned, spacing corrected, their presence layered behind him like armor that didn't announce itself. Supervisor Morrow moved toward the officers, with the eagerness of a man who believed reinforcement proved him right. He gestured toward the bent policy sheet, then toward Marcus, then made a short, choppy motion that seemed to attempt to compress the whole conflict into one efficient directive. The blonde officer kept his eyes moving, gathering security stanchions, laminated signs, the ring of watchers, the Marine in full dress with medals glinting like small suns. The black officer did the same but slower, as if each detail needed to introduce itself. Her gaze paused on Marcus's shoes, the polish, then climbed the clean geometry of his posture to his jaw. Something softened and then re-hardened in her expression, a flicker only those trained to notice would catch. "Officers," Morrow said, voice level with a hint of grievance. "We have a subject refusing to comply with event policy and causing a disturbance at the main entrance." The blonde officer's head tilted just so. Subject. He didn't write it down. He let the word hang in the air, and turned to Marcus. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on?" "I'm here for my sister's graduation," Marcus said, tone measured. "I have a registered ticket in the dean's block. Security is applying last night's policy instead of this morning's directive." The black officer's eyes touched the medals again. "Name?" "Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed." She nodded barely. "Do you have ID?" Marcus lifted his wallet straight up and out, slow and deliberate. "Military ID, an event ticket." He didn't extend forward. He held them where both officers could see before either approached. The blonde officer flicked a glance at Morrow. You called this in as, what exactly? Morrow's jaw worked. A non-compliant subject. Possible impersonation of a service member. He delivered the last clause the way some people deliver gossip. Quickly, then steadying himself as if it were a fact that could stand up by leaning. The words landed like grit in eyes. A few people in the crowd swore under their breath. Taryn's head snapped toward Morrow, as if someone had tugged a string at the base of her neck. That's a lie, she said, quiet but sharp. He's in the program. The unexpected twist rippled outward. Impersonation. It was a word that could reframe everything. That could drag a proud man into a humiliating submarine of verification and suspicion. The black officer's jaw tightened once. She looked toward the seals, measuring the faces there, and something like recognition flashed. Not of identity, but of type, the way a musician recognizes another in a crowd when they hear their silence. The blonde officer kept his voice neutral. Who has the updated directive? I do, the sandy-haired SEAL said, already lifting his phone but not stepping forward. County Memo, 0803 hours, authorizes main entrance for uniformed service members and registered family. Assistant to the Dean, Taryn added. I was at the briefing. The blonde officer nodded, not yet committing. He held out a hand. The sandy-haired SEAL angled the screen, so the officer could read, without taking it. The black officer stepped close enough to scan and after a moment, raised her radio to her shoulder, thumbed the side button, and spoke into it, low enough to keep the words from turning theatrical. Dispatch, 2 Adam 14 requesting confirmation on county directive for Westfield Civic Arena. Subject expedited entry for uniformed service members and registered family. Timestamp 0803. Copy. A squall of static, then a voice. 2 Adam 14. Directive exists. Copy expedited entry. Main entrance approved. Badge requirement rescinded for specified categories. Sent via email to venue leads. The crowd exhaled audibly. The blonde officer glanced at Morrow. You get that? Morrow's face did a strange thing, caught between indignation and calculation. I briefed my team on the venue policy. The county memo didn't come through in time. It came through, Taryn said, less carefully now. We all received it. The black officer's eyes slid to the bent laminate and the stapled second sheet beneath. What's that page? Internal note, Morrow said. Read it, she said, not unkind, but not asking. His lips thinned. It says to use discretion. On uniforms, the lean SEAL murmured. Low, the words more for the archive the phones were making than for this instant. Hold uniforms without badges. The blonde officer shifted his weight. When he spoke again, his voice carried the exacting cadence of training. Here's what we've got. A uniformed Marine with ID. A registered ticket, corroborating witness from the Dean's office. And a county directive supporting immediate entry. We've also got a crowd, a delay, and a security supervisor who chose an older policy and added notes that may have contributed to selective enforcement. Morrow colored deeper. Selective. That's an accusation. It's an observation, the blonde officer said, writing nothing, recording much. He looked back at Marcus. Sergeant Reed, have you made any threatening statements or gestures? No, sir, Marcus said. I've stood here. The black officer looked at his hands, still and open at his sides, then at his eyes. Anyone with you? She asked softly, and gestured with her chin toward the 4 behind him. They're here as witnesses, Marcus said. Friends, the older SEAL offered. The blonde officer nodded once, then tilted his head toward the crowd. Anyone observe him attempt to force entry? Hands went up. Not a few, many. The elderly volunteer's arm rose the highest. He's been a gentleman, she said, voice carrying that clean bell tone across the concrete. These men stopped him because they could. The black officer's radio crackled again. 2 Adam 14 supervisor en route if needed. Advise. She clicked back without looking away from Marcus. Stand by. Red and blue slid over her face, then his. She shifted slightly, blocking a fragment of the lights from hitting his eyes. The small kindness lodged in his chest next to the old ache. Sergeant, she said, lowering her voice so that it belonged to him first and the crowd second. I'm going to ask you to stay calm while we sort this. I know you've been calm. I'm asking you to keep being calm. Her eyes flicked to his medals, then back to him with a hint of recognition he couldn't place. I did my field training with MP detachments. I know what it is to hold still while everyone else tells a story about you. A faint, grateful muscle moved near Marcus's mouth and then stilled. Yes, ma'am. The blonde officer angled toward Morrow again. We can resolve this cleanly. Acknowledge the directive. Allow entry. Document and debrief later. Morrow's pride looked like a man on a narrow ledge surveying a ladder he refused to use, because he hadn't placed it there. He glanced at the cameras, at the seals, at Terran, at Marcus. If I allow entry under duress, he said, I set a precedent that policy can be negotiated by crowd. Or, the black officer said, you set a precedent that updated policy is followed. She didn't add, and that discretion isn't for detours around fairness. It hung anyway. The sandy-haired SEAL's phone buzzed again. He glanced down and exhaled through his nose. Another update, he said. County Communications just put the directive on their public Twitter feed to avoid confusion. Several phones in the crowd pinged in chorus. A modern church bell, the unexpected twist, doubled down. This wasn't just word of mouth. It was archived. Public, undeniable. The blonde officer's gaze sharpened at that. All right. He turned slightly, directing his words to Morrow, but pitching them for everyone. We will facilitate lawful entry consistent with the directive. That's our call. Morrow snapped. It's the law's call, the blonde officer returned, and stepped toward the door, a quiet decision traveling down his body into motion. The crowd's volume rose, buoyant and nervous at once. A chant didn't start, not yet, but its cousin did. A rolling ripple of encouragement, soft yeses, murmured let him in, quiet claps that were more heartbeat than applause. The black officer took half a step with her partner, then paused as if remembering something. She studied Marcus one more time. Where's your seat? She asked. Front row, left side, he said. Her mouth twitched. Not a smile, more like agreement with a fact the world ought to have accepted 5 minutes ago. She touched her radio again. 2 Adam, 14, were facilitating entry per directive. Units hold off unless requested. Copy, dispatch said. Supervisor Morrow looked like a man swallowing a pebble. He raised his chin and spoke to the tall guard without taking his eyes off the phones. Stand fast, he said. We are not. The blonde officer turned back, patience thinning. Supervisor, step aside. Morrow didn't move. The air tightened, sound stretching thin. The seals shifted in unison again, not forward, not aggressive, simply present, the line at Marcus's back clarifying, the message wordless and unmistakable. This ends with dignity, not spectacle. And then the black officer's expression changed. Just a flick. She tapped her partner's sleeve and angled her head toward the laminated policy in the tall guard's hands. Camera left, she said low. In the reflection, the handwritten note caught the cruiser's lights and fluoresced for a heartbeat. Hold uniforms without badges. Her gaze flicked to Morrow. He looked away too late. She exhaled once, long. Then she squared her shoulders, pointed with 2 fingers to the ground directly in front of Marcus, and spoke clearly so that the command would be captured by every microphone within reach. Hers, the phone's, the day itself. Sir, she said, not unkindly, but unmistakably official, we need you to step away from the entrance. The command sounded neutral on its face. Step away from the entrance, but it arrived with a freight of assumptions, the kind that try to rearrange reality with a gentle hand. Marcus understood that tone. He'd heard versions of it in airports, in lobbies, in conversations that began with sir and ended with cooperate. The crowd seemed to hear it too. The murmur shifted, the kind of ripple that runs through an audience when the lines of a play are familiar. He didn't move. He kept his hands visible, fingers loose at his sides, posture clean and level. Officer, he said, steady. I've complied with every request. The county directive authorizes my entry. I'm not obstructing. I'm standing at the entrance I'm supposed to use. The blonde officer lifted his palms in a de-escalation gesture, voice even. We're going to clarify a few things, okay? Then we'll make a decision. Decision, the lean SEAL murmured under his breath. Half to the phones, half to himself, as if cataloging vocabulary that did subtle harm. The black officer's eyes flicked toward the laminated sheet again, and then back to Marcus. Sergeant Reed, do you understand that we're asking for temporary compliance so we can secure the scene? I understand, Marcus said, that every minute we stand here, my sister's ceremony moves forward without me. Polite, procedural, and yet, every clause hung over a drop-off of implication. Subject, Secure the scene. Decision. Language that painted a man in uniform as a variable to control. Morrow folded his arms, collecting authority like a cloak. Officers. The simplest path is to escort him to entry B, verify and resolve. Escort. The sandy-haired SEAL repeated, tasting the word. He is not under investigation. The blonde officer regarded the SEAL briefly. Sir, I need you to let us ask our questions. We'll speak if details are misstated. The older SEAL replied, calm as stone. Phones pivoted to the officers as if on a pivot pin. The elderly volunteer held hers low, as if refusing to turn grief into content, but she did not look away. Sergeant, the black officer began, are you here alone?
My mother is inside, Marcus said. My sister's graduating. I'm her brother and registered guest.
Any prior issues with security here? She asked, each syllable chosen to be banal, each one threading a needle in a public that had learned to read between lines. No, ma'am. The blonde officer nodded, writing nothing. You're aware that private venues can set entry policies. I'm aware they have to follow county directives when those directives supersede older policies, Marcus answered. A low, appreciative hum rolled through the veterans in the crowd. Not triumph. Recognition. Have you raised your voice? The blonde officer asked. No. Made any threats? No. Attempted to push past security. Marcus let the silence answer. The chorus of cameras did too. The taller guard shifted, then forced stillness into his arms, as if attempting to hold his own narrative in place. Do you intend to comply if asked to move to the side entrance? The blonde officer asked. And there it was again. Intent. Not will you, but do you intend the kind of phrasing that imagines future disobedience and then prosecutes the imagination? I intend, Marcus said, to follow the directive, which says I can enter here. I intend to sit in the seat reserved for me. The black officer's expression changed by a hair. Her voice dropped, a private register that the microphones would still hear. I'm not disputing the directive. I'm assessing the moment. Do you trust me to handle this cleanly, if you give me 30 seconds? Marcus considered the question. Trust here wasn't a feeling. It was a calculation of risk made on a clock that was running out of ticks. He held her gaze, and found not softness but accuracy. I trust the directive, he said. I'm not moving because when I move, the story changes words. It becomes subject complied after confrontation instead of policy was applied equally. Something like respect crossed her face, brief and blunt. Understood. A voice cut across the steps, crisp with professional interest. Is there an official spokesperson for the venue? A woman in a charcoal blazer eased through the cluster, press badge bright against the fabric. She had the posture of someone who'd learned to command space without apology. A camera operator slid beside her, smooth as if the ground had been laid for their feet. Morrow's jaw tightened. This is a private security matter. We have media guidelines. I'm outside your doors, on public steps at a public ceremony, she said, not raising her voice. I'm Mia Carlton, Channel 8 Investigates. She turned slightly toward the camera without losing Morrow in her peripheral vision. We're live. A murmur lifted like steam. Leave changed the weather. Leave meant the narrative couldn't be sanitized later with edits and euphemisms. Leave dragged the subtext into captions. Mia pivoted her mic toward Marcus, careful not to invade the officer's triangle. Sergeant Reed, may I? Marcus nodded once. Why are you here? She asked. And why are you being kept out? I'm here for my sister, he said, voice steady. I'm being kept out because the venue is choosing yesterday's policy over today's directive. Mia's eyes knifed to Morrow. Supervisor Morrow. Operational decisions, he said. Arms folded, are made to ensure safety. Define safety, the older SEAL said softly, not to her but to the air. The camera caught it anyway. Mia didn't miss a beat. Officer, she looked at the nameplate. Keen. Has your dispatch confirmed the directive? Yes, the blonde officer said simply. Mia angled the mic toward the black officer. Officer Daniels, what's your assessment? Daniels kept her eyes on Marcus. We have policy conflict, public scrutiny, and a lawful directive. My goal is to resolve with minimal harm. Minimal harm, Mia repeated, letting the phrase ring. Daniels didn't answer. She didn't have to. The camera panned slowly from Marcus's medals to his hands to the handwritten note glowing faintly in the reflection. The sandy-haired SEAL watched the camera find that detail and flicked his gaze to the lean SEAL with a look that said, witnesses are no longer optional. They're infrastructure. The lean SEAL gave the slightest nod. Supervisor, Mia pressed. Did you or did you not initial a note advising your team to hold uniformed attendees without badges? Morrow's nostrils flared. Internal guidance isn't up for public accountability, Mia supplied, quick as a strike. Officer Keene, is hold uniforms without badges part of the county directive? No, Keene said, still even. The directive rescinds the badge requirement for the specified categories. The man in the suit who'd urged his wife to go around earlier shifted, shame pinching his mouth. He took her hand again, but this time he squeezed as if apologizing through skin. Sergeant Reed, Mia said. Some watching might ask, why not just use the side entrance? What would you tell them? That fairness that requires a side door, Marcus said, isn't fairness. It would have been a neat ending beat for a broadcast clean clause. Clean face, a logical break to weather or sports. But life did not honor broadcast structure. Hold on, the camera operator murmured, touching his earpiece. Mia, they're telling me one of these gentlemen is... He didn't finish because the crowd found the beat first. A student in a cap and gown jogged up the steps, breathless, eyes bright with adrenaline. I just came from inside, he blurted. Are you? He pointed toward the older SEAL, Commander Hawk. Several heads snapped toward the older SEAL. He didn't move. The rumor that had drifted earlier hardened like poured metal. Hawk, the student repeated, awed. You're the opening keynote. A new ripple surged. Unexpected, structural, unavoidable. The stakes didn't rise. They surfaced. Morrow's face went a peculiar gray pink. Not with fear but with a sudden awareness that the ladder he'd refused had been held by the man he'd been stonewalling. Mia pivoted like she'd been born on ball bearings. Commander Hawk, are you the invited keynote for this ceremony? Yes, Hawk said, as if admitting the weather. He looked at Marcus. I came to watch a Marine be treated like a Marine. Morrow swallowed, audibly. Commander, with respect, this is a venue matter. It's a public matter, Hawk said, not unkind. And a moral one. Keene's professional mask didn't slip, but his eyes recalibrated the geometry of the scene. Daniels didn't react. She had already done that math. Inside the glass, the orchestra fell silent. A voice tinny through the barrier announced the order of speakers. Someone somewhere would be scanning a program, looking for a man who had not walked in. Officer Keene, Mia said, voice pitched to the frequency where audiences lean forward without realizing, given that the keynote confirms his identity and the directive confirms policy, what prevents resolution? Keene looked at Daniels. Daniels looked at Morrow. Morrow looked at the slender power he'd built on laminated paper and realized how badly it fit under live lights. Nothing, Keene said. We can resolve. Relief rose, premature, fragile. The crowd exhaled. Taryn closed her eyes for half a second. A whispered thank you molded into breath. The elderly volunteer's shoulders softened. Morrow's radio chirped. He hesitated, then lifted it. Go, he said, voice clipped. Static. Then a voice on the other end. Official and insulated. Supervisor. Command here. Status. Morrow's eyes slid over the sea of cameras. Over Hawk. Over Keene and Daniels. Over Marcus, who had not moved. He pressed the transmit button. Command. Subject remains non-compliant. At main entrance. Crowd assembled. Officers on scene. Subject. The word did violence by grammar alone. Keene's jaw worked once. Daniel stared at the radio as if it were confessing. Command's voice returned, thinner with distance, stronger with authority. Copy. For scene stabilization, detain subject for questioning and escort to auxiliary. Confirm. A collective intake of breath swept the steps. The sound a theater makes when a character chooses the wrong door. Keene didn't answer. Daniels didn't move. Morrow's thumb hovered over the transmit key, eyes fixed on a point beyond anyone's face, as if looking that far ahead would absolve the choices made right here. The radio crackled again. Impatient, institutional, final. Repeat. Command wants him detained for questioning. The words detained for questioning echoed in Marcus's head, but not in the officer's voice anymore. They began to fade, pulled under by another voice, deep, measured, and decades older. Son, they'll try to take your dignity. Don't ever let them. His father's voice. It came with the scent first. Sharp gun oil, leather in the faint metallic tang of spent brass. Then came the image. His father's hands, broad and steady, resting on a table scarred from years of cleaning rifles. The light from a single lamp had fallen across his face, catching the fine silver hairs along his jawline, the lines in his forehead carved by sun and war. His father, David Reed, had been a quiet man, a Vietnam veteran who carried the war inside his bones, the way some men carried their faith, quietly, constantly, without needing to prove it to anyone. He didn't tell war stories to impress, he told them to warn. Marcus had been 14 that night. Sitting at the edge of the table, the black metal of a disassembled M16 spread between them. David had guided his hands over the barrel, the receiver, the trigger assembly, his voice low and deliberate. "They'll dress it up in polite words, Marcus," he'd said, feeding a cleaning rod through the barrel. "Procedure, policy, safety. But what they mean is, they don't want you here, they don't think you belong. And they'll do it with a smile so they can tell themselves it wasn't hate." Marcus had nodded, not fully grasping yet. "What do I do when it happens?" "You stand," his father said simply. "Stand in the truth you've earned. Don't swing. Don't beg. Don't let their version of you replace the real one. That's how they take your dignity. You don't give it." The memory cut clean into another years later. The smell of burning diesel and hot sand under an unrelenting Afghan sun. He was 27. And the world was noise. Gunfire cracking from a ridgeline. A convoy of vehicles boxed in on a narrow road. Smoke from a burning truck stinging his eyes. He had been in the third Humvee when the lead vehicle hit the IED, the blast flipping it onto its side. The radio chatter was chaos. Someone was screaming over the net for a medic. Marcus had moved without thinking, his boots pounding into the dust, the weight of his rifle balanced against his chest. The smell of cordite was thick, mixed with the tang of blood. He'd reached the wreckage, crawled into the twisted metal where 2 Marines were pinned, and used his bare hands to tear through a section of warped door. One man's eyes were glassy, shock setting in. The other was cursing, trying to push himself upright despite the shrapnel embedded in his shoulder. "Stay with me," Marcus had told them, voice calm, even as his pulse roared in his ears. He dragged them clear, laid down suppressing fire for the corpsmen, and kept his body between the injured men and the hillside until air support roared in overhead. When it was over, the lieutenant had clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You saved them, Sergeant. You know that, right?" Marcus had nodded, but he'd felt no glory. Just relief and the bone-deep understanding that dignity was as much about who you protected as it was about who you were. Now, standing on the hot pavement outside the civic arena, he could still feel the weight of that day, and the insult of subject remains non-compliant. Bit deeper, because it was being leveled at the same man who had once run into fire for strangers. He looked past the crowd to the double glass doors, catching a warped reflection of himself. Dress blues immaculate, medals earned, not gifted, back straight. And yet here he was a problem to be solved. The contrast seared. In the desert, the uniform had been a shield, a mark of trust. Here it was a filter for suspicion. He inhaled once, slow, tasting the air. Asphalt sunscreen, the faint scent of popcorn from the concession stand inside. The smells didn't belong together, but then neither did this moment. Keene, the blonde officer, was still holding his ground. Daniels watching Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. Maybe calculation, maybe something closer to recognition. The SEALs behind him remained still, but he could sense their readiness in the small shifts of weight, the shared breathing. Marcus's father's voice came back one more time. Quieter now. "Standing isn't about the body, son. It's about the line you draw in yourself. Once you know where that line is, nobody can move it but you." A figure moved near the edge of the crowd. A man in a faded Army veteran's cap, pushing a wheelchair with an elderly woman wrapped in a light blanket. The man's eyes landed on Marcus, and something passed between them. Not pity, not curiosity, understanding. The man gave a single nod, small but solid, and kept moving, guiding the chair to a shady corner. The crowd's murmur swelled again. A slow boil. People weren't just watching anymore. They were leaning in, eyes darting between Marcus the officers and Morrow. Phones rose higher, arms extended to catch every angle. A few began whispering to each other with a sharpened urgency. "Are they really holding him out here?" "He's in the program." "My cousin's inside." "They said they're about to start." Marcus's chest stayed steady, but the burn in his stomach deepened. The humiliation wasn't in being questioned. It was in knowing the answers didn't matter. He could produce ID, proof of service, a personal escort from the keynote speaker himself, and still someone could decide the rules bent differently for him. Hawk, the older SEAL, shifted a half step forward, his voice pitched low but carrying. "Sergeant, you've done your part. Let the rest of us do ours." Marcus didn't answer. He kept his gaze on the doors. The tension was a living thing now, stretching thin over the scene, ready to snap at the lightest touch. Even the summer air seemed to still, waiting. And then, from somewhere deep in the crowd, a voice cut through the hum, raw, loud, and impossible to ignore. "Let him in, or we all walk out." The words hung in the heat, heavy and electric. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then another voice took it up, and another, and another. The air shifted, the sound swelling into something that wasn't quite a chant but carried the same pulse. Phones swung to catch faces. Morrow's jaw clenched. Daniels's eyes sharpened. Keen's hand twitched near his radio. Marcus stood in the center of it all, his father's words ringing like a bell in his head. "Don't ever let them take it." The first voice had been a spark. The second, a match. By the time the fifth person shouted, "Let him in," the heat was spreading, a current moving through the crowd that neither the guards nor the officers could control. Veterans were the quickest to step forward. A man in a weathered leather vest with Vietnam vet stitched across the back raised his voice, low and gravelly. "This man's in uniform. He's earned his place in there." His words didn't fade. They stacked one on top of another as other veterans echoed him. A young woman in jeans and a hoodie, clearly not military, cupped her hands and called, "This is discrimination, y'all know it." That drew a few cheers and several more phones into the air, cameras catching the moment from every possible angle. Morrow's face tightened, and with a quick hand signal, he ordered his security staff to widen the gap between the crowd and the entrance. Two guards moved forward with practiced steps, their palms out, urging people back. "Please clear the entrance area," one barked. The order didn't land the way it usually did. Instead of retreating, the crowd adjusted only enough to form a tighter semicircle around Marcus, like a living barricade. The guards' eyes flicked between the officers and Morrow, unsure whether to press harder or hold the line. Somewhere near the front, a tall man in a baseball cap angled his phone vertically. On screen, a red dot blinked live. The comments began to roll faster than the eye could follow. "What's going on? Why's he being stopped? Name and shame the supervisor." Within minutes, that single stream surged past 10,000 viewers. Other bystanders noticed and opened their own live feeds. The sound of the crowd was now being duplicated in living rooms, offices, and coffee shops across the country in real time. Marcus didn't look at the cameras. His focus was forward, the same stillness he'd learned in formation, the same discipline that had steadied his hands under fire. He wasn't here to perform. He was here to stand. The SEALs behind him stayed quiet, though their eyes tracked every movement from the guards. Hawk's hands remained clasped loosely in front of him, but his jaw was set in a way that suggested he was counting each unnecessary second. "Sir," one of the younger guards said to Morrow, voice low, "if this gets any bigger." "It won't." Morrow cut in, sharper than intended. "Maintain the perimeter." The blonde officer, Keen, took a small step toward Marcus, lowering his voice. "You're becoming the focal point here, Sergeant. I need to make sure this doesn't spiral." "It already has," Marcus replied evenly. His eyes didn't leave the glass doors. The black officer, Daniels, was scanning the crowd, her gaze catching on a small cluster of students in gowns who had slipped out of the side entrance to watch. Their tassels swayed in the warm breeze, their faces shifting between curiosity and anger. One of the students, a young black man, lifted his chin toward Marcus. "That's messed up," he called. "He's here for the same reason we are. Why's he out here?" Morrow snapped his fingers toward the nearest guard. "Move them back inside." The guard hesitated. Whether out of reluctance or calculation was unclear, but before he could act, one of the veterans stepped in front of the students. "They have a right to stand here," he said simply. Phones caught that too. The comments lit up. "Veterans protecting students now. This is unreal. Name the venue." A woman's voice in the crowd rose above the rest. "We'll all go in together, or none of us will." The ripple of agreement came instantly, not in one unified chant, but in pockets, a few here, a few there, until the sound knitted together into something undeniable. The guards shifted again, more uneasy now. Keen's radio crackled, but he didn't answer. Daniels stepped closer to him, speaking low enough to almost disappear under the ambient noise. "If they start moving as a group, we lose containment. This isn't worth that." From behind Marcus, the sandy-haired seal finally spoke. You think this is about containment? Daniels glanced at him, measured. I think it's about preventing escalation. Escalation's already happened, the lean seal murmured. Only question now is which way it tips. Near the edge of the crowd, the reporter Mia Carlton was still filming. Her mic lowered but her camera pointed steadily at Morrow. Her voice was calm, but there was steel under it when she said, Supervisor, you're aware the live streams are climbing past 20,000 now? Morrow didn't look at her. His jaw locked, and he adjusted his stance, as though bracing for a physical push that wasn't coming. Marcus heard none of it. His mind was locked on the muffled music inside, the sound of the ceremony moving forward without him. The image of his sister, sitting among her graduating class, scanning the crowd for his face, hit him with a quiet ache he refused to show. A man with a DSLR camera leaned forward to get a clear shot of Marcus framed by the entrance. Hold it right there, he said softly to himself as the shutter clicked. Morrow tried again, raising his voice over the growing murmur. This is your last chance to comply willingly. Side entrance, verification, and you'll be seated in. He was cut off by the sound of the PA system from inside the arena, booming through the closed glass doors and into the charged air outside. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice announced, smooth and amplified. Please welcome our honored service members. The words rolled over the crowd like a wave. Every head turned toward Marcus. The seals behind him shifted in unison, their presence suddenly sharper, as though the title itself demanded something of them all. Keen's lips pressed into a flat line. Daniels's gaze didn't move from Marcus's face, as if bracing for the choice he was about to make. The applause from inside bled faintly through the glass, steady and oblivious, a celebration that should have included him but didn't. Marcus didn't move. He simply inhaled, slow and deep, as the words honored service members echoed back through the glass like both an invitation and a dare. The applause from inside swelled like a tide against glass, muffled but unmistakable. The sound wrapped around Marcus in waves, steady clapping, the occasional cheer, and each pulse of it was a reminder that the celebration had begun without him. The PA announcer's voice rolled through the doors, smooth and practiced. Please join us in recognizing the sacrifice and dedication of our nation's service members. The words were scripted for inclusion, but the irony pressed against Marcus's ribs like a bruise. Inside, his mother sat in the front row, her gloved hands folded in her lap. She leaned slightly forward, her gaze darting between the stage and the main entrance, scanning for her son's tall frame in dress blues. The stage lights caught the silver in her hair, but not the quiet panic in her eyes. She had told friends, neighbors, and church members that today she'd watch both her children honored, her daughter with a degree, her son in uniform. Now, as the audience applauded, her smile faltered. On stage, the dean shook hands with a group of veterans already seated in a place of honor. Marcus's chair, front row, aisle seat, sat empty under a reserved sign. The gap was obvious to anyone looking, a single missing note in a planned harmony. Outside, the crowd was still in a tense half-circle around Marcus. The seals remained behind him, silent, but watchful. Keen and Daniels, the two officers, exchanged glances that were not about procedure anymore. They were about optics, about the pressure in the air, thickening by the second. Morrow, stiff-backed near the door, kept one eye on the glass and the other on his radio. We hold position, he muttered to his team. From somewhere behind Marcus, a voice rose, carrying over the summer heat. They're calling the service members, and he's standing right here. What more do you need? A few in the crowd clapped in agreement, not the applause of celebration, but the sharp rhythm of impatience. The sound made Morrow's jaw clench tighter. Inside the arena, the announcer's voice boomed again. We are deeply grateful for your commitment to protecting our freedoms. The applause swelled again, unbroken, but Marcus's name was not spoken. Taryn Cho, the dean's assistant, stepped closer to the officers. This is already a public embarrassment, she said, voice low but urgent. That seat is empty on stage. His mother is looking for him. Every second this goes on makes it worse. Morrow gave her a look that could have frozen water. This isn't your call. It is when you're embarrassing the dean's office, Taryn shot back. The seals exchanged quick glances, the kind of nonverbal conversation only people trained to read each other could follow. The sandy-haired one's eyes flicked to the older man, Hawk, who gave the smallest of nods. The broad-shouldered seal tilted his head toward the door, and the lean one narrowed his eyes slightly, measuring the space. Daniels caught it. She didn't say a word, but her hand shifted slightly away from her radio, as if preparing for something. Keen's voice cut into the static tension. Supervisor Morrow, you have confirmation of the county directive. You have corroboration from the dean's office. You have the keynote speaker's presence. If you continue holding this man here, you're manufacturing a confrontation. Morrow didn't respond. He stared at Marcus as if willing him to step aside, to move just enough for Morrow to frame it as compliance. Marcus stayed rooted. He felt his father's words again, steady as bedrock. Don't let them take it. Inside, the applause softened into the rustle of programs being folded onto laps. The announcer shifted tone. And now we begin the conferring of degrees. Marcus's chest tightened. He imagined his sister rising from her seat, making her way toward the stage. He'd promised her, in a late-night phone call months ago, when you walk across that stage, you'll see me first. Now, the promise was unraveling in front of strangers. A murmur ran through the crowd outside. Someone had pulled up the arena's live stream on their phone, holding it high so those around could watch. The camera angle inside swept across the front rows, lingering just long enough for the missing seat to be obvious. A few in the crowd gasped softly at the sight of Marcus's mother, still scanning the entrance. Daniels shifted her weight. Supervisor, she said, not quite as soft as before. You're one step away from making this irreversible. Morrow turned to her, irritation flashing. And you think letting him walk in now fixes it? I think it stops it from getting worse, she said. The reporter Mia Carlton angled her mic toward the exchange but didn't interrupt. She was waiting for the moment the dam would break, knowing the live feed would carry it instantly. Inside, the audience's attention had turned entirely to the stage. Outside, the crowd's attention was locked on Marcus. Two ceremonies were happening at once, one sanctioned and scripted, the other unfolding in real time with no program. Keen's radio chirped. He lifted it to his ear, listening for a few seconds before lowering it again. Command says they're leaving the resolution to on-scene discretion. Hawk's eyes locked on Keen. Then resolve it. Keen didn't answer. Not yet. His gaze flicked to Morrow, who gave the slightest shake of his head. It was then that the sandy-haired SEAL leaned just enough to speak under his breath, his voice low but deliberate. We're done waiting. The words were not loud, but they hit like a starter pistol in the quiet space between actions. Marcus felt the shift behind him, the subtle alignment of bodies, the tightening of the air. Daniels's eyes narrowed slightly, reading the change. Keen's hand hovered near his belt, not in threat, but in readiness. And inside the arena, the announcer's voice called the first name from the graduating class. The ceremony was moving forward, and so were the SEALs. The words "we're done waiting" were still hanging in the air when the first movement came. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. But it was deliberate. The four SEALs moved as one, stepping forward in perfect synchrony. It wasn't aggression. No puffed chests. No pointed fingers. Just a forward glide of presence so absolute that it rearranged the space in front of them. The guards instinctively stepped back. Not far. Not enough to look like retreat. But enough to change the geometry of the doorway. Their bodies were no longer blocking it. They were just standing near it. And in this kind of standoff, near was already a crack in the wall. Morrow caught it immediately. His voice spiked over the crowd. Hold position. This is not an authorized. He didn't finish. The chant started again. Louder this time. More unified. Let him in. Let him in. The syllables hit like small drums, shaking the air. Morrow tried to out-volume it, raising his voice. This is a violation of venue policy. But his words dissolved under the rolling chant. Every time he opened his mouth, the rhythm surged. Keen and Daniels didn't move. They stood to the side, watching closely, weighing whether to intervene or to let the weight of the moment decide for them. Daniels's eyes kept flicking between Marcus's face and the crowd, reading both like 2 pages of the same story. The sandy-haired SEAL gave Marcus a single nod, small, unshowy, but unmistakable. Marcus understood. He stepped forward. 2 SEALs moved just ahead of him. 2 just behind. The crowd's noise swelled into something between applause and defiance. Marcus's chin stayed level, his eyes fixed on the glass doors. Each step felt heavier than it should, but not with fear. It was the weight of every time he'd been told to wait when the truth was that waiting meant losing. Every time the rules bent in ways invisible to those not targeted by them. In his peripheral vision, phones tracked his movement like spotlights. He didn't look at them. Morrow moved sideways into his path, Hands up. Sergeant Reed, you need to. The broad-shouldered SEAL's voice cut in, quiet but final. Move. It wasn't barked. It wasn't shouted. But the tone was such that people simply obeyed it. Morrow's jaw worked, but his feet shifted half an inch, then another. Enough. Marcus walked through the gap. The doors loomed now, reflecting the scene back at him. The crowd, the guards, the officers, the four men behind him, like a shadow made of solidarity. His own reflection stared back in full dress blues, medals bright, posture unbroken. When he reached the doors, the lean SEAL pushed one open, with a calm, measured hand. No shove, no flourish, just the easy certainty of someone doing exactly what needed to be done. The noise from inside spilled out, the tail end of applause, the muffled rustle of a crowd settling again. The air inside was cooler, carrying the faint smell of polished wood and floral arrangements. The moment Marcus's foot crossed the threshold, it felt different. He'd been standing outside in the heat for what felt like hours, the air heavy with doubt. Now each step onto the carpet was an act of reclamation, each inch forward a quiet taking back of something that had been wrongly withheld. Behind him, the crowd roared, not just clapping, but shouting, whooping, a release of pressure that had been building since the first side entrance demand. Inside, the ushers froze mid-step. One looked to Morrow, who was still outside the doors, red-faced, mouthing something to his team. Taryn appeared at Marcus's side, her eyes wide but steady. Your seat's still open. This way. The SEALs fanned out just enough to keep the path clear without touching a soul. Keene and Daniels followed at a distance, neither interfering nor leaving. As Marcus walked down the aisle toward the front, heads turned row by row, following him like a slow wave. A few people clapped quietly. Some just stared, brows knitting as they pieced together the fragments of the scene they'd missed outside. He didn't rush. He didn't slow. He just kept his eyes on the front of the hall, the place where his sister sat with her classmates, the place where his mother waited in the front row. Halfway down the aisle, Marcus caught sight of her. She had been leaning toward the stage, still scanning the crowd, when her eyes found him. The shift in her expression was instant, worry dissolving into relief, relief giving way to pride so fierce it brought her to her feet. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. She simply straightened, hands clasped at her waist, watching her son walk. The announcer on stage faltered mid-sentence, glancing toward the aisle as if unsure whether to keep reading or acknowledge the quiet spectacle unfolding. And then, as Marcus stepped into the light near the front, a figure on the stage moved. A man in full dress uniform, chest crowded with ribbons, silver stars glinting at his shoulders, turned from a side conversation and looked toward the aisle. His eyes landed on Marcus, and he froze. The applause in the hall dulled to a murmur, like the room itself had noticed the change in air pressure. The man, a decorated general, stood still, his expression unreadable but locked squarely on Marcus. Marcus kept walking, his gaze steady, but in the general stillness there was a story waiting to be told, one Marcus hadn't expected to face today. Whatever it was, it would hit before the ceremony was over, and it was about to change everything. The general didn't blink. For a long, thick moment, he just stood there at the edge of the stage, eyes locked on Marcus as though the rest of the room had vanished. Then he moved. His boots struck the polished wood with the slow, deliberate weight of someone who had spent a lifetime making sure each step meant something. The chatter in the audience thinned. The graduates on stage shifted in their seats, following the motion. Even the announcer, still holding the microphone, fell silent mid-word. Marcus stopped halfway to his seat, the two men measuring each other without a sound. The general was taller up close than Marcus had expected, his broad frame still carrying the posture of combat readiness despite the ceremony around them. When they met in the aisle, the general extended his hand, not the limp grip of formality. This was a full clasp, firm and unmoving, his palm calloused, his grip locking like it was pinning something in place. "Sergeant Reed," the general said, voice low but carrying. Marcus returned the handshake with equal firmness. "Sir." The general didn't let go immediately. His eyes scanned Marcus's medals, in a glance that wasn't just recognition, it was inventory. Then he released his hand, turned on his heel, and faced the entrance where the guards still hovered in the doorway. "Explain yourselves," he said. No raised voice, no barked order. But the timbre was weighted, a tone forged in years of command. It didn't need volume, It carried an authority that made every person in earshot straighten involuntarily. The taller guard swallowed, glancing at Morrow, who was lingering just outside. "Sir, we were following a posted protocol." The general's head tilted a fraction, the kind of gesture that could make a private forget his own name. "Protocol?" "Yes, sir." The stockier guard jumped in. "We had orders to direct anyone without special clearance through the side entrance." "You had a uniformed Marine," the general cut in, still calm, with proper identification, a reserved seat, and a county directive granting him entry here. "And you denied him?" The taller guard's mouth opened and closed. "We didn't have confirmation of—" The general's eyes narrowed. "You didn't seek confirmation." The silence that followed was its own kind of punishment. Somewhere behind the guards, the crowd outside was still buzzing. The sound bled faintly through the open doorway. Not loud enough to be words, but loud enough to be felt. Inside, the graduates leaned forward, sensing the shift in the air. Morrow finally stepped inside, his hands clasped behind his back. "General, if I may." "You may not," the general said without looking at him. The slap of that shutdown wasn't physical, but it landed harder than one. Morrow's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the audience, then to the cameras still rolling from the press row. "Sir, with respect," he tried again. The general turned then, fixing him with a look that was not anger, but something colder. Disappointment sharpened into precision. "I served 32 years, Morrow. I know what orders look like. I know what discretion looks like. And I know when both are being twisted to serve something neither was meant for." Morrow's face flushed, but he stayed silent. The general took one step forward, not toward Morrow but toward the audience, his voice lifting just enough to carry to the far wall. "When a man wears this uniform, you treat him as if he belongs, because he does. Anything less is not just a failure of courtesy, it's a failure of the values we claim to defend." The shame in his tone didn't just land on the guards. It rippled outward, catching in the throats of those who had watched and said nothing until it was safe. Marcus didn't move. His hands hung at his sides, his posture still a Marine's, but the words sank deep. He could feel his father in them. The general turned back to him. "You still have time to take your seat, Sergeant." "Yes, sir," Marcus said, but he didn't move until the general stepped aside, clearing the path fully. The taller guard shifted as Marcus walked past, his lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. The stockier one looked down at the floor, hands clasped in front of him. When Marcus reached his row, his mother was still standing. She didn't reach for him. She just gave him a look that said, "I knew you'd get here." The general followed him toward the front, but instead of taking his own place on stage, he stopped beside the announcer's podium. He leaned in, his voice just audible enough to carry over the microphone to the nearest rows. "Call his name," the general said. Then sharper. "Now." The announcer blinked, startled, glancing down at the program in his hands. His eyes flicked to Marcus, then back to the general, then to the audience. The general didn't repeat himself. He didn't have to. The announcer's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice catching for the first time all day, "please join me in welcoming to the stage Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed." The sound of the crowd's intake of breath was almost as loud as the applause that followed. An applause that was starting, but not yet at full force. Something told Marcus that the moment he stepped onto that stage, it would grow into something no one in that arena could ignore, and the general was watching to make sure of it. Marcus stepped forward. The first few claps were scattered, polite, but then they grew, row by row, rising like a wave, until the entire arena was on its feet. The applause was no longer just for a Marine walking to the stage. It was for the battle he had fought before even crossing the threshold. The sound filled the vaulted ceiling, rolling down the aisles, and into the corners, carrying with it something heavier than celebration. It was vindication in rhythm. Marcus didn't smile. He kept his stride even, steady, the way they'd taught him to walk during inspection drills. Each step measured, heel to toe, eyes forward. But inside something shifted. Not relief. Exactly. Not triumph. Just the quiet knowledge that he had walked through the wall they'd tried to keep standing. In the front row, his mother was on her feet, her gloved hands pressed to her lips. Tears pooled in her eyes, catching the light and glinting like the metals pinned to his chest. She wasn't crying from sadness. This was something deeper, a mix of pride and release. The kind of tears that come when the fight is over, but the adrenaline hasn't yet let go. On stage, the dean stepped back, giving Marcus a clear path to the center. The announcer moved aside, eyes down, his cheeks still flushed from the general's whispered order. At the edge of the stage, the 4 seals stood like carved stone, arms at their sides, feet planted, scanning the room without moving their heads. They didn't cheer, they didn't need to. Their silence was its own kind of salute. The lights caught the medals on Marcus's chest, sending sharp glints into the crowd. They reflected clean, but Marcus's gaze wasn't on the audience. It slid past the front rows, past the cameras, and landed at the back of the hall. There, near the shadow of the doorway, stood the 2 guards. They weren't blocking anyone now. They weren't speaking. But they were watching, not with pride, not even with regret, but with the uneasy stillness of men who had been seen for what they were. The applause went on. It had stopped being a formality. Now it was sustained, deliberate. People clapped because they wanted to make up for the hours they hadn't spoken, for the seconds they had watched and done nothing. Marcus took his place in the center of the stage. The general stood slightly to the side, hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable but his eyes fixed on Marcus. The sound of clapping faded just enough for the microphone to pick up the breath Marcus took before speaking. He hadn't planned words for this moment. There had been no moment to plan for. But before he could decide whether to speak at all, the noise of the audience shifted. It wasn't applause anymore. It was the low murmur of people checking phones, leaning to whisper to their neighbors. A ripple of attention moved through the crowd, like a wind passing over tall grass. Marcus felt it before he understood it. The vibration against his leg. A phone buzzing in his pocket. The arena seemed to close in for a moment, the clapping dimming in his ears as he slipped his hand into the side seam of his dress blues and pulled the phone free. The screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize. No name, no state code he could place immediately. The buzz stopped, then started again. The same number, persistent. He glanced at the general, who raised one eyebrow, but said nothing. The seals at the edge of the stage didn't move, but he could feel their attention shift slightly, their posture tightening by degrees. Marcus looked back toward the guards at the rear of the hall. One of them had their phone in hand too, not raised, not filming, but visible just enough for Marcus to notice the faint glow of the screen. The unknown number kept vibrating in his palm. The applause still hadn't fully died, but now it was competing with something else, a new question settling into the room. Marcus's thumb hovered over the green icon. He didn't know yet that answering it would change what this day meant. And the call wasn't going to stop. The hallways of the ceremonial center had emptied hours ago. The lights were still on, bleached and sterile overhead. Street sounds filtered softly through cracked doors, as Marcus Reed leaned against a wall just outside the auditorium, where he'd walked in like a war hero, reclaimed what was his. The adrenaline rush was gone now, replaced by a fine tremor of both exhaustion and elation. His mother had wrapped him in a tight embrace, her tears still wet on his dress bruise, and the 4 seals stood quietly behind them, stoic and unyielding, as if drawn in by fate to this exact moment. Now, alone with his thoughts, Marcus let the weight of it all sink in. The ovation, the general's intervention, the echo of camera shutters, the roar of the crowd, it had all felt surreal. He had marched across that stage carrying more than medals. He'd carried pride, blood, legacy, and defiance. But there was also the wounded sting of exclusion, the memory of guards blocking him, the shame he'd swallowed in silence before the seals had finally cut through. His phone buzzed, startling him. The screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize, just Legal Affairs. He swallowed hard, his pulse skipping. He braced himself and tapped answer. Marine Reed? The voice was calm, professional, yet carrying an undercurrent of grave urgency. Military Legal Affairs. We need to talk. Now. Marcus pressed himself upright, mind sharpening instantly. Yes, this is Corporal Marcus Reed speaking. Corporal Reed, the voice continued, as if on autopilot. We've been monitoring developments from today's graduation ceremony. That footage is going viral. We need a formal statement from you as soon as possible. Are you somewhere you can talk? Marcus nodded reflexively, even though the caller couldn't see him. Yes, I'm in the building, just outside the auditorium. Good. I'll hold on the line while you gather your thoughts. The line clicked softly, then carried ambient silence against the low hum of the corridor. Marcus closed his eyes. Later, after he'd sorted through his adrenaline and emotion, he might replay that moment. The prick of fear, the tightening knot in his chest, The sudden realization that this was no longer just about one man barred from graduation. This was becoming a fight of broader consequence. When the call picked up again, the voice sounded gentler, as though steeling itself. First, thank you, Marine. We know you're exhausted, and this is not part of the ceremony plan, so we'll keep it brief, but we need your perspective. Please describe what happened, in your own words, from beginning to end. He exhaled. Memories split apart, splintered into vivid shards. He spoke in short bursts. I was outside the entrance, waiting to go in full dress uniform. I showed my ID to 2 guards. They told me no, said policy restricted entry. I stood there, I stayed silent. Then 4 men appeared behind me. Navy SEALs. They walked in. I walked in. Inside, a general confronted the guards. They made me go on. I got applause. I'm in now. But this was wrong. The voice on the line was quiet, absorbing every syllable. Thank you. We'll transcribe this. Next, has this kind of thing happened before? Anyone else been stopped while in uniform? Marcus's mind darted. He'd seen angry comments on social media, heard murmurs at the live stream. They say it's rare, he admitted. But today it happened, and was recorded. Exactly. The voice sounded relieved. We found reports. 3 similar incidents in the past year. None made it to video. None generated awareness. Arbitrary enforcement. Policy used selectively. But your case changed everything. A jarring heat of realization flared in Marcus. So this isn't just about me. No. Not at all. The voice softened, urgent. Your footage is going to shape military access policies. But you should know, this goes higher than you think. Marcus froze mid-sentence. For an infinite beat, the dim hallway seemed to bend inward. What do you mean? Not just base policy. Congressional. The voice was lower. We're preparing reports for rulings, for hearings. This could end up on the Hill. He shook his head in disbelief. A surge of adrenaline returned. Only now, it was tempered with dread. His mind flashed back to the graduation banner, sunlit and triumphant, clashing painfully with detention threats. Now that clash would echo in corridors far beyond the ceremony hall. I didn't expect this. Marcus's voice trembled, not fear, but the weight of how far it had already traveled. The real fight, he realized, was only beginning. Get some rest, the caller advised. We'll send you documents, draft statements, guidance. You have legal support and visibility now. You're not alone in this. But be ready. The line went quiet again, signaling an end. But Marcus didn't yet hang up. He stared at the phone, mind racing. He thought of his father's voice. They'll try to take your dignity. Don't ever let them. And of the SEAL's silent solidarity, and of every camera that had captured him against his wishes. Yet now was his strongest armor. He finally ended the call. The hallway lights flickered. Beyond the door, laughter and chatter had resumed, as people exhaled post-graduation. But for Marcus, everything had shifted. The battle was no longer personal humiliation. It was now a fight for policy, for recognition, for justice. Unexpectedly, his phone pinged again. Another message. He opened it. It was from an unknown sender. No number. Just HQ. Inside was a single image. A blurred screenshot of the 4 SEALs walking behind Marcus, taken from ground level. Their faces obscured, and a caption identify them, for their safety and ours. Marcus's heart pounded. The protective cover of anonymity was cracking. The solidarity that had saved him might now put those 4 men, brothers in arms, in danger. He pressed his back against the wall, gripping the phone as if it could ground him. The laughter inside the auditorium felt distant, hollow, improbably. His fight had grown more complex and more urgent. He looked down the hall, towards the doors leading into the light, into public celebration, then back at the message, the intersection of loyalty and risk, of exposure and justice. And he realized he was standing at the threshold of something even bigger and more perilous. As he stared at the photo, the faint click of approaching footsteps echoed behind him. Weeks had passed, but the air in the hearing room was still heavy, not from the weather. The government building's air conditioning was steady and cool, but from the weight of the story that had pulled so many people into this room. Marcus sat at the long oak table, the microphone angled toward him. His dress blues were as sharp as the day of the graduation, though this time the medals on his chest weren't the focal point. It was the man wearing them. Behind him, seated in the first row, were the 4 SEALs. They wore civilian clothes, but their presence filled the space like a shield. The panel before him was a mix of county officials, Veterans Affairs representatives, and civil rights advocates. Each had a stack of papers and a laptop open, but their attention was fixed on Marcus as the chairwoman spoke. "Staff Sergeant Reed, thank you for agreeing to appear before this committee," she began. "Your testimony will help us determine the extent to which existing security protocols were applied in a discriminatory manner." Marcus nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." The footage from that day had played earlier in the hearing, all 21 minutes of it, from the most-watched livestream. The opening frames showed him standing at the arena's entrance, the guards motioning him toward the side door, the crowd beginning to gather. The panel had watched the chants rise, the SEALs step forward, the general intervene. They had seen the moment Marcus crossed the threshold, and they had heard the ovation when his name was finally called. By now, the clip had been seen more than 40 million times across platforms. News anchors had debated it. Social media had dissected it. Commentators had argued over whether it was an isolated incident or a symptom of something wider. Marcus's voice, when he began, was steady. That day wasn't about me trying to break a rule. It was about the rule already being bent, but only for me. He kept his eyes on the panel, but his words were measured so the record would capture them exactly. "They said it was protocol, but I've seen protocol used enough times to know when it's a shield and when it's a weapon. That day, it was a weapon. It wasn't about security. It was about control. It was about making sure I entered on someone else's terms, even if those terms stripped away the respect my uniform was supposed to carry." One of the panelists, an older veteran with a Purple Heart ribbon on his lapel, leaned forward. "Sergeant Reed, what was going through your mind when you stood there?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "My father's words. He served in Vietnam. He told me, they'll try to take your dignity. Don't ever let them. That's all I was thinking about. Holding the line, even if I had to do it in silence." The chairwoman nodded and made a note. "And the presence of the Navy SEALs behind you, was that coordinated?" "No, ma'am," Marcus said. "They didn't know me. We'd never met before that day. But they understood what was happening, and they decided not to stand by." From behind him, the sandy-haired SEAL gave the smallest of nods, almost imperceptible, unless you were looking for it. Over the next 40 minutes, Marcus answered every question about the guards, the officers, the supervisor, the general's intervention. He never raised his voice, never embellished, never left space for someone to claim he was exaggerating. He didn't need to. The footage had already spoken. When the testimony ended, the chairwoman addressed the room. "This committee will be recommending immediate policy changes. While we cannot undo what happened to Staff Sergeant Reed, we can ensure that no service member, no veteran, and no civilian is denied entry to a public event based on discriminatory enforcement of security procedures." The specifics were small: retraining of event security personnel, clearer escalation protocols, a requirement for independent oversight during high-profile events. But they were real. Marcus knew enough about systemic change to understand that small shifts were often the first cracks in a wall. As the session adjourned, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor filled the space. Marcus stood, his back straight, his jaw set in the same calm line it had held on that hot day outside the arena. The SEALs rose with him, naturally falling into place just a step behind. The hallway outside the hearing room was crowded with reporters, camera operators, and staffers carrying folders. Flashbulbs popped, microphones angled forward. Questions were fired. "Do you feel justice was done? What message does this send to other veterans?" But Marcus didn't stop. Not yet. It wasn't until he reached the steps outside the building that the crowd thinned enough for him to breathe without being jostled. The sunlight hit him squarely, warm but not oppressive, and for a moment he just stood there, looking out over the plaza. That was when he noticed him, a young black man standing a few feet from the bottom of the steps. His posture was uncertain, but his eyes were locked on Marcus. He was wearing civilian clothes, but the short cropped hair and the envelope in his hand gave him away. Marcus descended the last few steps, and the young man stepped forward, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the city noise. "Sir," he said, "I heard what you did, and it's why I'm here today." Marcus stopped. "Here for what?" The young man held up the envelope, a packet from the Marine Corps recruiting office. "I was on the fence about enlisting. I kept wondering if I'd be respected, in the uniform. Then I saw what happened to you. I saw you stand there and not back down. I figured, if I'm going to wear it, I want to wear it the way you did. For the first time that day, Marcus's expression softened. He glanced over his shoulder at the SEALs, who were watching silently, and then back at the young man. He thought about the heat of that afternoon, outside the arena, the sting of being told to move, the weight of the crowd's eyes on him. And he thought about the moment the SEALs stepped forward, the general's firm handshake, his mother's tears in the spotlight. That uniform, Marcus said quietly, won't always protect you from disrespect. But it will always remind you who you are, and you decide whether they take that from you. The young man nodded, clutching the packet a little tighter. Somewhere behind them, a car horn blared, and the city moved on. But Marcus knew the moment wasn't small. It was the real victory. Not the policy change, not the viral clip, but the fact that someone had seen what solidarity looked like and decided to carry it forward. And as he walked away from the building, the words of his father echoed in his mind, not as a warning this time, but as a truth proven. Don't ever let them take it. If watching Marcus stand his ground lit something in you, if you believe no one in uniform or out of it should ever